Louise Johnson, known as Sister Misericordia.
Yes.
We'll find out how you got that name in a little bit. Thank you for coming to share your story. And let's begin at the beginning of your journey, where you were born and siblings and what family life was like for you.
Yes. I was born in Toledo, Ohio.
Okay.
My parents had first 3 boys. Then I was born. I was the 4th child in the family, and the first girl, followed by another girl, my sister Nancy, and then followed by a 4th boy. So there were 6 in the family.
Nice.
And it was a loving family. It was the end of the Depression years and the beginning of World War II. So obviously, along with other families, we didn't have a great deal, but we were a happy family. For the most part, we were the only grandchildren and the only nieces and nephews of my aunts and uncles for quite a few years, because my father was the oldest in the family and my mother was the youngest in her family. So her nieces and nephews were all older, and my dad's sister's brothers were younger than he. So it was like the beginning of my dad's family and the end of my mother's.
You mentioned about your family life, it was during the Depression.
The end of the Depression.
The end of the Depression. Can you recall an event or an experience in your family that just stands out for you as you look back?
As I recall, I mean, we had what we needed.
Yeah.
I don't remember ever going hungry. But I do recall that any time, and my aunts and uncles were very generous to us, and they, would share what they, what they could with us and help my mother and dad. And I can recall that, like at Christmas time when I hear, kids give parents a list, we would never have a thought of doing a thing like that. But whatever little gift that we would get at Christmas time, usually something we needed,
Right.
not anything extra. But anytime anybody got anything, because I can remember when I got my first bicycle, my brothers were just delighted to think, because it had to be a girl's bicycle. But anytime anybody got anything, they were just so grateful. And that whatever we got, we shared with one another.
A great value you got from your parents.
Oh,
right.
It was wonderful, and I am eternally grateful to them.
What was it like living with 4 brothers? 3 older, especially.
You know what? I have been grateful to them all my life. My brothers were, I never had, I have no memory at all that they were anything but generous and caring with us. And I remember that my sister and I were recalling this recently, that they had bicycles and we were small. I mean, we were too young to have a bicycle anyway. But they would take us in the afternoon and after they were out of school and take us for a ride on their bicycles. That was always that kind of thing.
Now, what about school? You went to school, grade school, high school?
Well, in my early elementary years, my father loved the river, and so he had found a home that was just out of town, out of the city of Toledo, in the city of Waterville, or the town, I guess it was, probably at that time. And it was kind of on a hill and overlooked a couple of blocks of the river. My father loved that. So because we were living in that little town, there wasn't a Catholic church in that town. We had to go to another little town to go to Mass on Sundays. So we were in a public school at that time. Okay. So for the first 3 years, I was in a public school. But then the war came, and there was gas rationing, and so we had to move back to Toledo because my father worked in Toledo. And so that was when we moved into Blessed Sacrament Parish in Toledo, which was staffed by the Adrian Dominican Sisters.
Right.
So now we've come to that. So my first year then was in the 4th grade. And I went from 4th to 8th grade with the Adrian Dominicans at Blessed Sacrament. And we had a wonderful principal, Sister Lambertine, who was the musician for the school. So beginning in 4th grade, I took music lessons from her, piano lessons from 4th to 8th grade. And by 5th grade, I was singing in the children's choir. And she gave me a great love for music, particularly classical music. And I had, through that, had opportunities that she would give me tickets to attend concerts. And I remember one of the concerts that I attended was to hear the Trapp family singers at the Peristyle at the Toledo Museum of Art. And I thought, what a great opportunity that was. I mean, I appreciated it then, but, you know, even more so now. So that was always a wonderful thing for me.
Good.
So.
Good. And what about high school?
Well, in high school, in Toledo, we had 2 girls' high schools, Catholic girls' high schools. One was Ursuline Academy, run by the Ursuline Sisters, and the other one was the Notre Dame Academy, which was staffed by the Notre Dame Sisters. And those sisters were wonderful. And my sister decided that she would be a Notre Dame sister eventually. And but I was never drawn to them. I was always drawn to the Adrian Dominicans.
And a question I always ask, and why the Adrian Dominicans? Now, you had 3 different orders of sisters. You experienced them. Oh, the Ursulines and the...
Well, I didn't go to the Ursulines.
Oh,
I didn't go
okay.
to Ursuline
Okay.
Academy.
Okay.
So why the Adrians? Their love of one another. You could tell that in their interaction with one another. Their joy in teaching. And I always wanted to be a teacher. Even from the time I was in 1st grade, I'd come home from school, teach my sister. She could read before she went to 1st grade.
Oh, good.
And then, and I can remember, I just thought of this last night, we had a wonderful school library. And I remember reading Sister, oh my gosh, now the name's, and it was the stories, children's stories of Dominican saints. And I think I read every single one of them in the elementary school.
And that,
So I was
that
just-
impression, what saint did you want to be?
I don't think I had determined anything that serious. I just wanted to be a Dominican because I wanted to follow that way of life. I don't remember really that the sisters talked about, the Dominican order or anything specific, but they lived it. And I think that made a great impression on me.
Very good.
And in fact, I had, talked to my parents about entering, early, and my mother had said, not until after you graduate from high school.
Oh, you wanted to go earlier, huh?
Well, I had thought about that. So I knew that was. So it was after I graduated from high school. And then I went to Siena as a student
Okay.
for the first semester after I graduated from high school. And met wonderful faculty.
It
at
was
Siena
mostly
Heights.
the nuns that were teaching at that
Oh,
time. Yeah.
That's all I knew.
Yeah.
I had Sister Benedicta Marie for religion, Father Jim Burke, the Dominican,
great,
for scripture. And I was majoring in English, and Sister Robert
Louise.
Yeah, Robert Louise was the head of the English department. She was, I guess I wanted to model my teaching after her. She was excellent. So in December, or probably toward the end of December, early January, I had an appointment with Mother Gerald
Okay.
and entered in February
February, okay.
of 1953.
1953.
Yes.
Okay. So did you have quite a few that entered at that time? Usually not in February, but
Well, there were 3 of us, but
Okay.
I've thought about this. From that freshman class, over the years, 12 entered the community. I mean, they didn't all remain.
Right,
And some
right.
are now deceased,
Right.
but we had some wonderful
it
people.
was a good year.
Yes,
Good
it
class.
was.
Mhm.
Very good.
So then you were in formation here in the program here in Adrian.
Yes. And that was the early years of Sister Margaret Phillip, who had just begun in the fall
Okay.
as the postulant mistress,
Yes.
and Sister Patricia Johnson. And she was absolutely top notch. I loved Sister Patricia Johnson. She was the scholar, the theologian. She was just excellent.
So she made an impression on you?
Oh, sort of.
Good, yeah, great woman.
Yes, she was.
So then following your formation program, you were sent out?
Yes,
Or
I
you-
was,
or
but
you
I better
stayed?
tell you about my name.
Oh, Misericordia, yes, your name.
Yes.
How did you get that name? Your mother's name is not Misericordia.
No, it certainly wasn't.
No.
Well, I had asked for a combination of my parents' names and my sister and brother's names. Those were the options that I had.
Yeah.
But I learned that both names had already been taken. And so Sister Margaret Phillip said to me the night before reception that Mother Gerald was going to name me. So at the practice, I didn't know what the name was that I was going to receive. I think maybe she had said it was a name for Mary. And, she said, you were formerly known, and then henceforth you shall be known as Sister Mary Misericordia. And she looked at me and she said, do you like that name?
How do you spell it?
No, I knew Our Lady of Mercy.
Right.
And so I looked and I thought, do you want to stay?
So what
I
you're
thought-
telling us is maybe you didn't like that name.
And I love the name. It was, I had had enough Latin and all of that, so that was no problem for me. But my reception day, my second oldest brother, who is a little Dickens, met me and said, "Hi, Misery." So when I taught high school for many years and had high school students, particularly the young men,
Oh, God.
they always called me Sister Misery. And they said, "Sister, that's not meant disrespectfully. That was just their name for me."
Loving. Misery. It's a long name. Little kids. Did you ever teach the little kids?
I taught first grade, and I
Oh.
want you to know that first graders were wonderful. They always said, "Sister Misericordia." I mean, they said the whole thing. They never called, little kids never called me Sister Misery. It was just the big. So, anyhow.
So as
And
you look at your many ministries, because then you went out and you didn't go to too many places outside of Michigan, right? Just Ohio, right?
Until
Until
the overseas.
I forgot you were the prioress over there, chapter prioress. But as you look at your ministries, we can't go through every one, but each of them offer us an experience and leave an impression or impact us in some way, be it challenging or be it very positive. Are there a couple that you could share with us that what was it that made that particular place or people important to you?
I would have to say that my experience in ministry were enriching for me. Every single one of them. They were learning experiences for me. And in each place, there were people who helped me. From my earliest days, until, much later. And I was always grateful for the kinds of help that I had. And I used to say, because I taught adult learners in the Detroit Public School,
Right.
basic education also. And I used to say, we are all learners. We never stop learning, and when we do, we die. I said, even if they haven't put the lid down on the coffin, we have died if we don't keep learning. And so I think that that's a critical thing. But when I was actually on a teaching staff, like in a school, I was always learning from students, if you're willing to listen to them. And I have to say, I never really had difficulty in discipline. Like with high school students, that was never a problem. If you had studied, you were prepared, you made life interesting for them, and they could discuss things, they were not a problem. When we're not prepared when we go in to teach. But I always learned from them also.
I always want to go back to those 3 older brothers, because I think living with older brothers is a gift, first of all.
It was.
Yeah.
Always.
That they may have prepared you for, you could conquer anything with the male students.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one time I was with Rosemary Ferguson, and I had to take care of a particular situation, and I said something to the person who was the head of the seminary. And when I finished, Rosemary said to me, "You had older brothers, didn't you?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, they weren't frightening to me.
No, no, that's good. So you mentioned the overseas. You were chapter prioress of the overseas vicariate.
Yes.
And that was not by choice?
Well,
did that
actually,
happen?
my name was raised
Yeah.
for that. And I have to say that, because we're interviewed by the council, and one of the council members said to me, "Oh, what makes you think that," because I had never been in the overseas. And one of the councilmen, "What makes you think that you can do this kind of ministry?" And I said, "Well, I've been teaching for the last 5 or 6 years, I think at that time, in the Detroit Public Schools, all over the city of Detroit. And I was meeting people, adults, from all different kinds of cultures. I mean, these weren't all, Caucasian
Right.
that we were teaching. And anyone who came in, and they were not all just like dropouts from high school in the last 3 years. I had people who were retired auto workers who were coming in. And, we dealt with the situations, whatever they needed, because I was preparing them for a GED. Because as we know, without a GED, at least because we don't have a high school diploma, you have to at least have a GED so that they could get a job. And I thought, if this is a way that I can help people move on to the next step in their lives, then why not?
But when you went to the vicariate, when you went to the overseas vicariate,
Yes.
your basic ministry was with the sisters, correct?
That is true.
And what countries did you encompass the vicariate?
Well, the vicariate at that time had 7 countries. We were in Peru,
Okay.
Puerto Rico, Bahama Islands, the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua,
Yeah.
Guatemala, and Kenya. Is that 7?
Sounds good.
I think that
has
was.
switched.
And
by
so,
now.
and our sisters were wonderful to me, because some of them, I knew before.
Right.
And I guess that's how my name got raised, because they knew me.
And how was that experience? You traveled to all those countries.
Yes.
And with our sisters.
Yes,
And I'm sure some of them were over there because they were sent,
of course.
right? And the language.
Well, I would like to say, first of all, that Sister Rosario Martin was my administrative assistant, and she's from Puerto Rico.
Right.
And I can never thank her enough for all the help that she was to me. She was trying to teach me Spanish. I didn't even know Spanish. Anyhow, and so she was a great assistance. But every single country that I went, the nuns were so wonderful to me and helped me, prepared me, whatever way that they could, assisted me. And I had an opportunity to meet the people, like especially in places like the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, where our sisters had been, already by that time for a couple decades. I had an opportunity to see the places that I had heard talked about, and where our sisters had lived and where our sisters had developed schools and all of that kind of thing. So that kind of thing was just a delight, to be able to see the places of Vessel's history and meet the sisters and meet their families. That was really important to me, to have that, if it happened to be that sort of situation. But then also in places where our sisters were beginning to develop new ministries with the people and how they were educating and preparing people to support themselves and provide theirs. And I remember reading one of the pastoral letters on our religious being in other countries and other missions. And I remember at the time that the bishops had said, we are not there to be forever. We are there to assist the people, to train them for leadership, and then to move out and let them take over the leadership. And that's what we were doing in so many places.
Not just in the overseas, but within the congregation.
Well,
and the
true,
places, right?
but I was particularly conscious of that kind of thing.
Now, I know you loved every country and all the people that you were there, but does one in particular come to mind as an experience I had in that country with the people that...
Well, in so many places that our sisters they were working with the poorest of the poor.
Right.
I mean, literally. Sister Roseanne Schlett, for instance, they were working in a terribly poor, and she was such a wonderful help to me through that whole thing. And to see what they could do and how eager the women were to learn and to develop. And I recall at that time our country was trying to eliminate the leadership in that country, the political leadership. And we had the Jesuits and the Maryknolls who were working there, and how they were being castigated in a sense that we were, that they were down there helping the Nicaraguans. And then when I went to Guatemala and saw our sister who was working with the Maryknoll sisters up in the mountains, and I remember she took me into I wanted to take me on a Sunday morning into the chapel to see the chapel, and there was a military man who was standing at the door with his guns and said, "You may not enter here." And so we were not allowed to enter the church because they wouldn't allow anybody to congregate. And how the people were so frightened that to have their sons go to Mass on Sunday morning because the military would be standing outside of the church to grab them, to put them into the military and use them as their faro. But we were supporting that government.
We?
U.S. government was supporting that. And I saw
I wanted to make sure people watching weren't thinking the Adrian Dominicans.
Yeah, oh no.
Our government.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
And I saw in Nicaragua how the government was making sure that people were fed, providing health care where they could. They had suffered from an earthquake, and who were the people who came to assist them? The Cubans. And I thought, this is so contrary to what we hear at home. And so when I got back to our country, I went to the School of the Americas in Fort Bennings, Georgia, to protest the training that we were giving to the military, for instance, in Guatemala, who were killing the people. And wrote to Washington and got a letter back from the State Department. And somebody said, "You're wrong." I said, "Have you ever been there?" And he said, "No." I said, "Then you don't know what you are talking about." I said, "I have been there and I've seen it."
And how much has changed now?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But who did we support? Maybe if we had supported, things might be different. Another place was, for instance, in Peru, where Pam Mellenbach, Sister
Right,
Pam Mellenbach, and Sister Mary Kay Duelius were, and they were taking care of people.
Nancy Hanna was there too.
Pardon?
Nancy Hanna was there as well.
Yes, earlier,
Mm-hmm.
not when I was in the office, and I saw how they were providing food, and a school had been built there, and a library for and these children had nothing. And in Kenya, East Africa, Catherine Deutsch and Katie McGrail were working with the sisters in Nairobi, and Dorothy Ferguson and Joan Peters were in Eldoret, helping to prepare the sisters there in those two different communities to take over the leadership. And I remember one of the times a Mary Knoll sister said to me, "Do you realize how much your sisters have contributed to making the sisters here, the Kenyan sisters, the leaders in this country?" And I thought, that's why they came, and they had done the job.
That's why they left.
That's right. But I also had a chance to see the poverty. Children with distended bellies, hair that had turned red because they didn't have sufficient food, water that you wouldn't want to drink.
Your journey throughout your life here as an Adrian Dominican, well, even began at home, has been very enriching,
Yes,
has
it
been
has.
very inspiring to hear, and I'm sure, or I know it certainly has had an effect on you, and your many blessings.
Been a blessing.
Many blessings. And to say what's one blessing you remember, I know they're numerous, but as you look back at your journey, as you look back at your life at this time, can you put into words what that blessing is or was?
Well, I would say that one of the great blessings in my life has been the fact that there have been people who have moved, who have been present to me and have helped me to move forward. And then I would hope that, my life, as I moved into people's lives, a part of people's lives, that I have helped them also. I think of, I was teaching high school during the 60s. Pope John and Vatican II and John Kennedy and Martin Luther King. And we studied the Ecumenical Council, what was coming out each day. And even when I see students now, they tell us what that has meant in their lives, that they want to be a part of the church that, helps others. And I think, I feel I've lived in a great period in time, and it's a blessing.
And I also noticed that, this was after you were out of the position as vicaress, that you became Associate Superintendent of Schools. That was the Archdiocese of Detroit, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Well, I had 5 years as a pastoral associate in
Right.
a parish, and then I had, I think, another 5 years as an associate superintendent. And I
you
worked
worked with Fran?
Sister Fran
Yeah,
Nadolny.
yeah.
And I have to say that Sister Fran was an excellent administrator of the schools. The schools were strong. Sister Fran helped us, who were associate superintendents, to assist principals in any way. I was actually in the personnel office. And so my responsibility was, keep records and see to it that teachers and administrators in school were certified. Mm-hmm. That was a critical issue for me, which I hope I was able to, I hope I was able to do. Mm-hmm. So that was, but I think that the whole thing of being able to be a part of people's lives. I thought of the state. I think it was "We Are a Part of the Future, Not Our Own," mm-hmm. written by Bishop Kennetner. Oh. Where we plant the seeds, right. And God waters them. We're not the master builders. God's the master builder. Mm-hmm. But at least we have contributed something, and I think that kind of sums up for me.
You just recently moved here on campus. Oh.
Yes.
And left the dear town or area of Detroit. How has this move to campus been, besides the fact that you and your dear friend Noreen were constantly present at the many funerals? You'd come in yes. all the time to the yes. wakes and funerals. Yes. But how has this transition been for you?
Actually, this transition has been, in a sense, relatively simple.
Good.
I lived with a community in Warren, at Warren Senior Housing, our own sisters. Right. We all had our own separate, but we had a community. Mm-hmm. And it was wonderful. I was there 25 years.
On Berg Street?
On Berg.
Oh.
Yes. And Sister Noreen lived in in fact, she was in a different building right. than right. I was. The rest of us lived in another building. We had our own thing. By the way, I wanted to say that Noreen was a wonderful mentor to me because she had been in pastoral ministry, and I was a pastoral associate for 5 years, but she was a great mentor to me at the parish mm-hmm. where I was. Anyhow, and the move here has been, as you said, we yeah. used to come in all the time. So yeah. somebody said to me, one of the women in the hall that I lived said, "Well, will you know anybody?" I said, "Well, maybe 300 or 400."
Yeah,
they all
very
laughed.
Good. Very good.
But
very
I wanted to come in here when I was physically able to be with the sisters.
Good.
And to enjoy them and to enjoy the campus and all that it offers, and it offers so much. Mm-hmm. I just encourage anybody who has any hesitations about coming.
You have to know what to choose and what not to choose.
Oh, there's so much here.
Right. Is there anything else as we wind up that you'd like to tell us?
Yes, that I had an opportunity twice to hear Dr. Martin Luther King, because I was teaching in Lansing at Resurrection High School during the 60s, early 60s. And besides teaching high school, I was in graduate school at Michigan State University. So Dr. King was visiting Michigan State, and I had an opportunity, Sister Noreen and I went to hear Dr. King at Michigan State University. And then later, in the later 60s, 68 actually, when I was back in Detroit, I heard Dr. King speak again. I think he was at Grosse Pointe South or something. Mm-hmm. At any rate, and I heard him speak again, and that was 3 weeks before his assassination. Oh, mm-hmm. And I remember that there was a man in his cohorts, Don Lobsinger was his right. name, mm-hmm. who was in the audience. And the auditorium was just packed with people. But he came down, and they came down from various places from the auditorium and headed toward the stage where Dr. King was. And I remember when they were interviewing him later, he said he thought he was going to be assassinated at that point. Yeah. It was frightening for all of us. But fortunately, the police came and removed Don Lobsiger and his friends.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, and that one of those famous photos of Dr. King was done by Tony Spina from the Detroit Free Press that we often see of
Yeah.
Dr. King, and that was, the occasion.
A very rich and varied life
Yes,
from the very beginning to this point of
and
the journey.
whatever the Lord offers me for the future, I will be grateful.
Right. Well, thank you, Pat. Mizzy, what they call you again?
Misery.
Misery. Thank you so much for coming and telling us a part of yourself that I'm sure many watching this did not know about you. And we thank you for your dedication and service in the congregation and to all those people whose lives you touched in all the various places that you've been. And,
Thank you.
And your dear sister, too, who's a
Notre Dame
Notre
sister
Dame sister.
in the
Yeah,
Toledo area.
in Toledo, yeah.
And she spent 28 years in Rome as
Oh, that's right.
treasurer of their congregation. So sometimes when I would come back from Kenya, you have to make a stop someplace, so I would make it through Rome,
That's right.
and that way I'd get a chance to visit her
I
because
always
she didn't
said-
come home very often.
I always said, make those trips work for you, and there's
You've got to.
You've got to, whatever, be with your family or be with whatever.
So I got to see
wonderful.
so much of Italy. She would,
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Siena.
Well, thank you, Pat Johnson, for doing
You're
this and
welcome.
for changing the original schedule. I think we had to do it about 3 times. So bless you.
Thank you.
Nice to have you on
And
campus.
I appreciate
Thank you.
this. Thank you so much.